Welcome to the special edition of FieldLink, where we're going to become more BeanWise as Helena locations across the United States celebrate Bean Week. In this episode, we sit down with two soybean experts from Tennessee and Kentucky to discuss how they're helping customers in their region maximize their soybean yields. We'll unlock the mystery of in-season plant nutrition with a powerful tool from AGRI-Intelligence. Finally, we'll break down some of the benefits of ENC Formulation Technology and how Fullscale can help tip the scale on your soybean crop this season. Stay tuned for this soybean special as we become BeanWise on FieldLink. This episode of FieldLink was brought to you by Fullscale. Help your crop reach its full yield potential by providing the right nutrition at the right time. Ask your Helena representative or ag retailer on how Fullscale can fit into your BeanWise plan this season. And welcome back to FieldLink for this special BeanWise episode. We're excited to have joining us today two experts from Western Tennessee. They're going to talk to us about beans and becoming more BeanWise. Joining me is Dustin MacArthur. He is an Agri-Intelligence product manager from West Tennessee, and Jameson Wade is a Helena products manager, also from West Tennessee in Kentucky. Guys, welcome to FieldLink.
Thank you, Bill. Glad to be here.
Yeah, likewise, Bill. Appreciate you having us on for today.
Hey, great, guys. It's Bean Week, and we're going to try to help our customers and our employees become more bean-wise as we talk about the importance of soybeans and soybean growth and development, especially kind of in mid-season. Most of the crops been put in. Things look pretty good across most of the U.S. Certainly, there are some spots where we have a lot of variability, but as we're, really into this vegetative stage right now and getting ready to go to that reproductive stage, we want to focus in on that specific area of that production time. And there's a lot of airplanes starting to fly and a lot of testing going on. And with that, Dustin, let's talk a little bit about what Agri-Intelligence has to offer to help producers better understand what's going on inside their soybean crop at this time.
Well, I think Agri-Intelligence as a platform has multiple tools that the growers can utilize, especially on a year like this year. In parts of southern Missouri and Arkansas and West Tennessee and Western Kentucky, early on, we definitely had a lot higher rainfall than normal. And so a lot of our crops were under saturated anaerobic conditions for an extended period of time. So I think really, diving into some imagery capabilities inside of our AI 360 platform, being able to really pinpoint areas of the field where we might have some biomass variability or plant health issues going on, I think could be a very good tool to utilize this year. But really, I think the extractor piece, actually going out, using that imagery to guide where we're going in the field and being able to utilize extractor in that same mindset as the imagery is really key this year, to really go in and pinpoint areas of the field and figure out what nutrients we might be looking at that the plants could be deficient in.
Dustin, I think that's a really great point. As you mentioned, in your region, we had a lot of water, a lot of rain. We still do in a lot of cases. Those plants are going through a lot right now, and utilizing that imagery can help drill down where those troublesome spots may be. But really, the extractor tissue sampling program, as I understand it, Justin, it kind of uncovers the hidden truth, so to speak. It really tells us what that plant is specifically hungry for.
Absolutely, Bill. And we all know through the history of looking at our extractor program and all the data we've collected really since 2004 and compiled is we definitely see a lot of trends, in soybeans as they start approaching R4. Extractor really tells us to really start paying attention to the potassium piece. We know the uptake curve in soybeans really getting into that late R3, early R4 stage. The potassium is a big component that the plant needs at that time to finish out that pod fill. But one thing I will say, with a lot of the weather that we have this year, one thing that we are seeing with this weather is a lot of our early extractor samples are showing a lot of nitrogen and sulfur deficiency this year that we're not typically used to seeing. And I think a lot of that is because of the anaerobic conditions, the poor nodulation that we had early in our soybean crop. So I would really tell guys to utilize extractor as a tool this year to really pinpoint the deficiencies that's in your growers' fields, because I think this is a year where we might see some oddities that the historical trends might not necessarily point to.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Every year throws different challenges at us in agriculture. There's the old saying, you get 40 crops, and most producers do, and this is just a different one this year for producers, specifically in West Tennessee, and as you mentioned, Eastern Arkansas, and really kind of around the country too. Everybody's got their different challenges, but Extractor gives this the ability to identify and uncover, specific trends, and you certainly identified some today. Jameson Wade, you're out and about, working with producers and working with Helena representatives to uncover some of these challenges. What are some products that, as Dustin pointed out, boy, some of these challenges? You mentioned nitrogen. A lot of folks, soybeans, they make their own nitrogen. They don't need anything. That's not always true, is it?
No, Bill, that could be nothing farther from the truth. I mean, in today's time frame, we're no longer looking at soybeans as a weed we grow in between our corn crops or our cotton crops. I mean, soybeans are an integral part of any farming operations, return on investment and the amount of money and time and a significant portion of their crop acres today. And we've got to manage those beans to the fullest of our extent and control all the things we can control, because in agriculture, so much of what drives our yield is beyond our control. So, we have to think about things differently than we have in the past. Today in our market, I mean, we're targeting 65 bushel dryland beans. We're targeting irrigated beans in the 70s to 80s. And those require a different level of nutrients than obviously 40 bushel beans or 60 bushel beans that we were trying to grow 10 years ago. So, utilizing extractor samples like Dustin said, and really building off high ground maps to be able to pinpoint nutrients and drive the dry goods that we need to from a NPK standpoint and sulfur standpoint is key early. And then we can come back in and follow in based off tissue samples and from extractor and help key in on those nutrients that the plants need. But, typically, when we get to, like Dustin said, when we get to the R3, R4 time frame, I mean, potassium's a key driver for us in our market on soybeans. And so having products available to us like Coron Metra 10B, which is a 10% nitrogen, 10% potassium product with a 0.5% boron, having products like that available to our realm to be able to feed that plant the nutrients that we all know it's going to need is vital.
Yeah, definitely. A product like Coron Metra can certainly come in there and fill the gap for some of those specific needs. And Jameson, it's not just coming in and filling out, that nitrogen need, which is critical, as Dustin pointed out with the extractor samples. But there's some other products can get a ride along too with that nitrogen to help not just feed the plant and defend the plant, but also potentially protect the plant. Correct?
That's exactly right. So when you get to R3 in our market, we've got a handful of diseases that can really come in and wipe out our yield. Okay. And so frog eye leaf spot's going to be a big one for us. So making sure we're targeting an R3 application of a fungicide and then throwing some insecticides in there with it to help protect that plant from diseases and from insects is going to be vital in our market. On these earliest planted soybeans, our biggest scare is really going to be stink bugs in a lot of cases. So making sure we've got a good quality insecticide for that. And then as we get later, in my market, we're gonna have a lot of pod worms get out there, and those pod worms can really feed on those insects or feed on those pods. So we got to make sure we're protecting against pod worms as well. So in that product, we're going to switch to products more like Besiege in that scenario, but making sure you've got a high quality fungicide in there. And you got to remember too, in our market and across all the U.S., a lot of these frog eye strains are going to be resistant to strobilurian herbicide or fungicides. So we got to make sure that we're using something that's got multiple modes of actions to make sure we're taking care of this frog eye to protect that plant from diseases, because we can feed it all the nutrition we want to and protect it from all that and give the plant everything it needs to set up and thrive from a nutrition standpoint. But if we can't protect the leaves from diseases and can't protect the pods and the leaves from insect damage, then we lose that solar panel that plant's using to help turn those nutrients into starch to feed the pod. So if we can't protect them from that, we can feed all the nutrition we want to, and it's not really going to matter. So we got to team those up with timely applications of fungicides and insecticides.
Jameson, that's a great point. Unfortunately, it's not a one-shot wonder, is it? When raising a soybean crop, there's different things that are getting thrown at that crop all the time, and Mother Nature's throwing us challenges. But being out there, Dustin, walking those fields with your agri-intelligence team and really identifying through, as you mentioned, extractor, but just be aware is absolutely critical, isn't it?
Oh, it is critical, Bill. I mean, just being out walking with farmers and walking with our AI personnel that is at the location level this year, we've definitely seen that. To Jameson's point, the stink bugs have become a pretty big issue this year. We've seen stink bugs at 50% threshold at R1, which is really unheard of. And you start going out there and sweeping fields or scouting fields 7 to 10 days later, and you can see those populations are increasing. So I definitely think the stink bug is going to be a big play this year in the beans. But Jameson mentioned earlier, about soybeans becoming a major crop for us, and us really needing to pinpoint those higher end yields. He's absolutely right. And as we get into these soybean behind soybean rotations, as we're out in the field and we're scouting, we're using imagery, we're utilizing extractor in the field, we can definitely see that these fields that are starting to become consistent soybeans, Septoria brown spot is becoming a big issue. And following that was probably going to be, frog eye. So go out, utilize imagery, walk your fields with your AI personnel while you're out there pulling some tissue samples, monitoring nutrient deficiencies. We always try to say that while we're in the field, let's utilize all the tools that we have and let's maximize our efficiency in the field. So, while we're out there tissue sampling, we're also scouting. And part of that process this year has really led me to understand the impact that stink bugs and really Septoria brown spot can play on this year's soybean crop.
That's great advice, Dustin. Dustin, are you seeing some trends with the stink bugs? Are they a little heavier in the south, moving north, or do you see any trends at all with that?
I'll be honest, I haven't really seen many trends. I will say that one thing that is surprising me this year is kind of the early egg lay that the stink bugs have had this year. I've already seen going into the second generation, we've already had a stink bug egg lay and immature showing up really from the south end of my territory all the way to the farthest northern part of my territory, which is going to be a little north of Sykeston, Missouri. So really seen them throughout the whole territory that I cover, Bill.
I gotcha. And Jameson, you mentioned frog eye. Frog eye was always kind of dubbed as, it's a disease just predominantly in the South. But I'm sure you've talked to your counterparts. Frog eye's moving further and further north every year, it seems like.
Absolutely. I remember back when I first started in the seed business back 20 years ago, I was up in Indiana, and I remember pointing out to guys then frog eye leaf spot showing up on beans, and it was like something they never heard of. And no doubt that disease is predominantly moving more and more north, seems like every year. Kind of like southern rust for us did in corn. Heck, 15 years ago, we didn't talk a lot about southern rust in corn. And now it's just progressively kind of become a factor in the way we grow corn. And I think frog eye leaf spot's doing the same thing for guys in the north. We catch more and more southern winds. We're getting a lot of heat and humidity down here in the south, which is breeding spots for frog eye leaf spot. We get these tropical systems that come through the Gulf and just kind of drive those spores north. And I think we're going to see more and more of that as we keep coming in. And growing more in soybeans in the South. You got to remember we got more host plants than we did, 30 years ago. This was cotton country. And so now we got more opportunity for frog eye to live and thrive. And obviously the more it thrives, the more spores there are, they're going to blow north.
Yeah, definitely blow north. And Jameson, you talked a little bit about it. Frog eye is, you can't just use any old fungicide to handle that one. That's a little different beast, isn't it?
Absolutely. 15 years ago, we can control it easy with strobularian fungicides. Now we're having to have dual and triple mode actions, for us to help combat the frog eye's resistance to those strobularian fungicides. For us, our go-to is going to be Miravis Top. It's a product from Syngenta. We primarily promote that on these soybean acres. And for the guys that are trying to produce high yields and for guys that are trying to get the most out of their soybean crop, that one paired with foliar nutrition through Coron Metra 10B or through Full Bore, and then and then paired with a biostimulant product like Fullscale, that's the Cadillac program and what our growers are seeing the biggest return on investment with.
That's a great recipe there. Let's talk a little bit about Fullscale, Jameson. What does Fullscale deliver to the grower?
Yeah, so man, Fullscale is one of my most favorite products out of the 500 and something products that I cover for Helena. Me and Dustin started looking at this one really about 4 years ago in 2020 with one little 50-acre trial and scattering some stuff around that year. And, we put it on some trials that year and saw really good results out of it. And this year, we're going to sell somewhere between 160 and 200,000 acres worth of Fullscale across our geography. And so when you think about Fullscale, and for me, it really goes back to talking about how a plant builds its yield. Okay. So we talk a lot about soybeans and trying to figure out what impacts yield at different growth stages. So when you think about how a soybean builds its yield at reproductive time, the bulk of the nutrients that plant is going to feed the developing pod and then later on the developing seed, they're sitting there in the vegetative parts of the plant. Okay. The root activity slows down. The plant has by and large picked up all the nutrition it can from the soil and it's storing that in those vegetative parts. And then when you get to R3 and R4, where the plant is simply trying to move those nutrients from the vegetative parts of the plant and into the reproductive parts of the plant, that's where these biostimulant products like Fullscale thrive. Okay, you got a plant that's sitting there. We got a bunch of nutrients stored up in the vegetative parts of the plant. Fullscale is going to increase the amount of nutrients we translocate out of the vegetative parts and into the pods. It's going to increase that amount, and it's also going to increase the speed at which it does so. Okay. So think about it like this, and this is what I tell growers a lot. Imagine you're filling up your sprayer or your nurse wagon. If you're filling it up with a 3-inch hose versus a 1-inch hose, we're going to be able to fill it faster, right? That's what Fullscale is doing in that plant. So you pair that with some foliar nutrition via Coron, and we're going to drive more of those nutrients into the plant, which is going to help us set and hold more pods. Okay, more pods, you have the opportunity for more seed, and then later on, it's going to help us drive more nutrients into that seed and fill it, make it bigger, make it weigh more, right? So if we can hold more pods, which will be more seeds, and then we can make those seeds bigger, at the end of the day, we're going to be falling more bushels to the granary. So that's what it's all about.
So really, Fullscale is about pod production and just filling that bean, because we all know we get paid. Yes, we want to grow bushels. That's important, but it's all weight across that scale. And that's what Fullscale really delivers.
That's exactly right. More pods. And then that ends up being more beans, and beans that should weigh more. And again, like you say, we're hauling pounds across the scale, and those pounds turn into bushels.
Mm-hmm. Well, Jameson, what kind of yield response have you seen with Fullscale in your market? You mentioned you've been working with that product for the last 4 years. What kind of response have you seen?
Yeah, so typical yield response, and we have backed this up through our True Yield platform, through Agri-Intelligence, time and time again, we're seeing 6 to 7 bushels worth of yield on Fullscale when you pair it with a fungicide. So that's Fullscale and some kind of foliar nutrition versus a fungicide alone. We're picking up 6 to 7 bushels. And even in today's climate, okay, with soybean price not being what we all want it to be, right? Even at $10, if I can return a guy $60 on a $12 to $15 application, we've done a very good job for him. So I think that speaks volumes to what we're going to grow Fullscale again this year, even in a market where for us, our bean acres are down year over year, and beans are our primary play for Fullscale. So even in a year where soybean acres are down, even in a year where commodity prices aren't where we want them to be, we're still going to grow that Fullscale business year over year. And it's because it's all tried and true and backed by data. Our sales force believes in it, we believe in it, and our customer base believes in it, more importantly. And they keep coming back and buying more every year. Now, I will mention, you heard me say Fullscale in conjunction with some foliar nutrition. So again, it's about making sure if the plant doesn't have a lot of extra nutrients sitting in that leaf surface, right, we can throw the Fullscale on there, and it's like putting a 1,200 horsepower stock car engine in a race car and then trying to feed it with 87 octane. We got to have the nutrients there in the leaf. Okay. So that's where when we throw in that Coron Metro 10B or we throw in that full bore or whatever our extractor sample tells us that that plant needs from a nutrient standpoint, that's like then increasing the amount of octane we're throwing in that stock car engine. So Fullscale is a 1,200 horsepower stock car engine. The foliar nutrition that we put in it that's driven by our extractor samples, that's that 100 low lead. Okay, that's the turbo blue fuel that we're putting in there to really make that thing sing.
I think that's a great analogy, to lay it out like that for producers, because any of these products, it's kind of hard to rely on them to be, I like to call it the one-hit wonder. They need to work in sync a lot of times. And the extractor report that Dustin mentioned is what tells us and guides us what that specific plant is hungry for. That allows you and the Helena team to build a specific recipe that's important for that particular crop.
That's exactly right. There's no one size fit all scenario in growing soybeans. It takes everything to do. We got to start out right, from proper soil nutrition through dry fertility. We got to get the plant up and growing. That's where seed treatments come in. We got to keep it clean. That's where herbicides come in from weeds. And then we use the fungicides and insecticides to protect it from diseases and insects. Use our extractor samples to provide foliar nutrition, and then use the Fullscale to help move that nutrition where it needs to be in the plant. And so it's a program approach, and that's what it's all about, and that's what we're best at doing here at Helena, is helping that grower deliver a program approach that at the end of the day is going to provide him a positive return on investment and help him put more money in his pocket.
That's great stuff, Jameson. Dustin, if a grower's listening out there and they're interested in learning about what their crop's hungry, how what it really needs, how do they go about getting an extractor sample taken from their Helena representative?
Well, Bill, I would tell that grower to reach out to their local Helena sales representative and tell them what they're kind of looking for, what their desire is. The salesman will work with the Agri-Intelligence personnel at the individual location or branches, and we will try to utilize our personnel and our AI 360 platform to kind of figure out a layer that's probably best for us to go out and tissue sample for. We always like to have a reason for why we're pulling the tissue samples where we are in the specific locations throughout the field. So we'll try to devise some type of plan of attack there by utilizing some type of layer that we can gather on the field. And then one of our Agri-Intelligence personnel would go out and collect those tissue samples and send them off. We have a really good partnership with Waypoint and Memphis and surrounding labs throughout the in the Midwest and down in Texas as well. So generally the turnaround time for those is generally 2 or 3 days from the time the samples are collected to the results are getting back in the grower's hand. Is usually a 2 to 3 day turnaround, which is pretty quick for us. So we're able to go out to the field and pinpoint our site specific locations, gather those, send them off, get the results back, and come to the grower with a specific plan.
All right, great. And when those samples come back, it's kind of like the report card, isn't it, Dustin?
Absolutely. And like Jameson mentioned, it's not one size fits all. Every field, planting date, variety, certain soil types or soil properties on a field can definitely change some of the dynamics of what those extractor reports show. I think one thing we'll see this year is definitely planting date having a big emphasis on what nutrients are really showing up and really when the fertilizer was applied. A lot of ours were pushing for earlier planting. A lot of our fertilizer went out in March and April. And what happened in that time frame? We had 20 inches of rainfall. And so I think that's one reason why we are seeing a lot more nitrogen and sulfur showing up on these early tissue samples. But I know we all know historically what potassium brings to the table and when it starts showing up. And that's generally in that R4 window. One thing I will say is, unless you really have an extreme issue, I don't generally see a lot of deficiency show up on R1 growth stage soybeans. At that time, they're just now starting to really load up and they can kind of fend for themselves until that full bloom window. Really, I would wait to tissue sample and whenever we're in that later R2, early R3 stage, right before we're going to make a decision on a fungicide application. So just because we're okay at R1 doesn't necessarily mean that those soybeans are going to have all the nutrients that they need in the plant at R3 to R4. So I really like to try to gauge the tissue sample timing for beans in that late R2, early R3 window.
Yeah, that's great advice for all of our producers, whether you're raising soybeans in Minnesota or in Alabama. Kind of the agronomics still kind of come and play, don't they?
Absolutely. Agronomics are extremely important. That's what here at Helena we try to do. We try to put people in the field. We try to bring the knowledge that we have from data sets and our historical viewpoint of what we've seen in the past versus what's going on this year. So, that's why we have the investment in the agri-intelligence personnel at the locations, is to go out and walk the fields, get a visual of the crop, communicate that back to the Helena sales rep and to the grower, really give them a good idea where their crop's at, what their potential is, and some solutions that we can put in front of them that can really bring that ROI. One of the things that I've talked to many growers about this year is with the ag economy where it is, the 2-for-1 ROIs might not be something we try to really put our money toward this year. But if we know that we can go out with something that's going to provide the 4-to-1 or 5-to-1 return on investment, that's where a grower needs to be spending their money. And we've seen that through Fullscale in the program. We've had some plot initiatives in the North Delta. And last year we had 21 full-scale plots, and they had that type of ROI on about 90% of those plots. So we're very confident in this product. I asked the salesman if they don't have a lot of expertise or experience with it, I ask that they probably get it out and look at it and try to gain that confidence. It really is a top-notch product. It's one that can provide a lot of benefits in plant health. It's got a micronutrient pack that's really gauged toward that, seed size and grain quality aspect of the crop. That's kind of why we're in that, R2 to R4 window of application for soybeans, to really try to set that plant up to be the most potential that it can give us in that pod filling window.
Yeah, that's good stuff, Dustin. Absolutely. And, both of you guys touched about ROI where, hey, it's no secret. There's some challenges out there at the farm gate economically, but there's a lot of options out there. I think it's important to keep agronomics focused first. And Jameson, isn't it fair that growers really need to have a conversation with their Helena representative? There's a lot of finance options out there across the board, and have those conversations. Don't run from taking care of your crop and maximizing yield this year.
Man, Bill, that's exactly correct. And you mentioned it spot on with financing opportunities. There's opportunities to finance the fungicide products out there, the insecticide products. There'll be some opportunities to finance our products like Fullscale and Coron. And I think the ability to help that grower take that off his plate, maybe pay a reduced interest rate than what he's paying with whoever his operating loan provider is, that's going to be a big benefit. But you're absolutely right. On these beans that right now, we're in the window that we're spraying soybeans with fungicide. All these early beans look really, really good. And the yield potential is absolutely there. We need to be stepping our foot on the gas and try and drive some more yield into there, because, the more bushels we can put across the table. And again, we got to spend that money correct, right? We got to spend that money wisely, make sure we're doing in things that are providing probably, like Dustin said, more than a 2-to-1 return on investment. We spend our money wisely there. We get some bushels that we haul across the granary. We get paid for those, and we spend our money wisely. If we can make a $15 application and return $60-$70, that's a good day for us. And obviously, let's utilize the tools we got in front of us from financing programs. Let's utilize tools like we got in Extractor to help us figure out what that soybean plant needs to yield and thrive. Products like Fullscale to help us drive those nutrients to the plant. All of it's going to be a return on investment for that grower. And even in a depressed ag economy, if we can make 6 or 7 bushels worth of yield from a foliar nutrition and Fullscale application, and we're picking up another 4 to 5 or greater yield increase from a fungicide and insecticide, that's money well spent here at R3. And no doubt your local Helena representatives, from your salesmen to your crop advisors to product managers like myself and Dustin, we're here to help a grower spend those dollars wisely.
Yeah, definitely some great options out there. And, boy, guys, when I'm hearing this 3-4-to-1 ROI, what even greater sometimes, that's better than all of our 401ks. That's pretty good return, isn't it?
Boy, that's the truth. And, obviously we've had a couple of good days here in the stock market, but definitely not a 3 or 4-to-1 return on investment. And I'm like you, Bill, if you could guarantee me a 3 or 4 return on investment going into some stocks, I think we would all put our money right there. And the opportunities there on this bean crop. So let's push it and try and make some yield and set ourselves up for success.
Guys, I want to thank you both for joining me here today on this special BeanWise episode of FieldLink, helping us become more wise when it comes to raising soybeans and maximizing our yield potential this season with our soybean crop. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Bill.
All right, thanks for having us, Bill.
Thanks for joining us on this special BeanWise episode of FieldLink. Be sure to contact your Helena representative or ag retailer on how you can maximize your soybean yield this season.